Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Warwick F1 show. This is the third episode of the 2026 season. Feels really strange saying 2026. It is the 2026 season, and we are back with a race review. We've come off the back of the first weekend of the 2026 season in Australia, and there's quite a lot to talk about with a new set of regulations, new drivers, and potentially a team that's dominant at the front end of the grid. My name's Anwar, I'm your host for this episode. I'm joined by three others. We've got two people who you are very much familiar with on the pod. We've got our current Prez and previous content creation officer in Callum.
If you listened a year ago, you might recognise my voice.
Yeah. We've got our future content creation officer in Daniel, who's going to be taking over very shortly. And we've got Harvey, who's the first. This is your first time on the show, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, first time. Hopefully, first of many. To be honest, I'd love to come on.
Yeah, hopefully we see you around more often under Daniel's kind of leadership. Let's talk. Firstly, I want to hear your guys' thoughts on the race. I want you to describe this in 3 words or less.
Oh my goodness, focus on the spot. I've got one already, which I think is chaotic, which we knew immediately it was going to be because there is a lot of teams on the back foot in terms of where they are understanding the regulations immediately, and it almost felt like teams and drivers were trying to sort that out as the race was going on. I mean, with probably one of the biggest regulation changes we've seen in at least a couple of decades, I would say, maybe even more. Obviously, I can't remember way back into F1 history, but I don't think many drivers knew what to expect with the actual racing side of things, obviously not being able to test that initially, so chaotic was probably one. I'm going to have to...
I've got another C word, which is controversial.
I wonder what you're going to say.
There were many of the C words he could have used there.
No, we're not going that far. Yeah, there were very mixed reviews. We'll say that. It's an understatement. From the opinions of the fans and the media and the drivers themselves. Following both quali and the race, there were very different shifts in mindset, which I'm sure we'll get into. I certainly had shifts which changed from post-quali to post-race, and even pre-race, actually. You know, I thought we were heading straight for farcical territory, especially after Verstappen's crash in Q1, and then Piastri's seemingly accidental smash into the barriers off the curb when he just got an over-delivery of power. But after the race, I have to say my perspective shifted a bit.
Yeah, if I had to give 3 words, I would probably say especially for the race, surprisingly quite exciting, because after quali I was sort of despairing because when you just saw the super clipping in going into turn 9, it's kind of just not what you want to see, and there's definitely still problems with qualifying, especially at the moment. But the race, those first 20 laps, I was on the edge of my seat, especially 4 a.m. because I was despairing, because if it was a dull race,
I was actually staying awake at 4 a.m.
Yeah. So, but the fact that the race was really exciting, especially with the sort of Mercedes-Ferrari fight in the first 20 laps, I was really pleasantly surprised. And I've still got I've still got problems with these regs, and I still think qualifying's going to be problematic. But I just, in general, really liked some of the racing. And I know drivers did call it sort of artificial, but I feel like DRS was a bit artificial as well, so it's not...
I feel I think for another word I would think of is two-halved or kind of split in a way, because as you mentioned, the first 20 laps when the Mercedes and the Ferrari were, and Ferrari actually got that very good getaway and were kind of back and forth, Leclerc and Russell, it was just absolute cinema really. But then once the Mercedes came in under the safety car, which did turn out to be the right decision, which I guess we might have suspected when it happened immediately. But then obviously they were on different strategies, and you had Ferrari, what I guess we're maybe too used to seeing now nowadays in Formula 1, where it's just one car on a different strategy and trying to... The commentators are saying they're going to get there and challenge them for the lead eventually, but it just doesn't happen. And so that second half of the race perhaps felt a bit more like what we're used to seeing in terms of kind of over-strategizing and not real racing, I suppose, as we would say. So that was my take on it.
I mean, let's delve a bit more in terms of what we saw different, because there's a lot of change coming from aero, from engine. That means that there's a lot to kind of talk about on that front. What was your impression of the racing this time around versus last year, Daniel?
Well, last year we had a great Australian Grand Prix, but it wasn't necessarily because we had a lot of racing. We never typically get a whole lot of racing in Melbourne. It just generates chaos year after year. In 2023 we had a record number of red flags, and last year we had a lot of rain, probably a record number of rain. But what I liked this time was that there was actual wheel-to-wheel racing, and yes, you could say it's artificial. Like Harvey said, DRS was artificial. I personally believe that the battery management is even more artificial because Formula One's always been a trade-off between engine and aero, but it feels like the battery management's kind of neither. DRS was definitely on the aero side, which increased performance, but battery performance is less so, involved in the battery performance and making the car go as fast as possible, trade-off between straights and corners, right? So the fact that battery management led to some great racing, I was a little bit split on. But my goodness, 7 changes of lead. I mean, we can't complain, really. I mean, some people definitely will and maybe should, but I don't remember so many changes for the lead in a very long time. Like, yes, I think Russell and Leclerc probably quite green to the new regulations. I mean, everyone was, so learning how to manage that battery would have made for a lot of passing and repassing. It makes sense, and we might not see that so much in the future because they are learning how to defend and attack using the battery. But from what we saw, I think, I'd love to see more of it, but I hope it's not too commonplace that it becomes trivialised that we get a battle for the lead, because that is kind of sacred in Formula One.
I think the thing that made it exciting for me the particular 21st 20 laps is that with the new regulations it almost felt like everyone was on the same playing field all of a sudden, so which maybe is why we got battles such as Lindblad doing so well, for example, because everyone obviously the experience does help, but lots of people, even the more experienced drivers, are still having to get to grips with these new regulations, exactly like how the younger drivers are doing as well. So I felt maybe it kind of leveled the playing field a little bit in terms of drivers and their experience with the car, because there was so much to get to grips with. The problem, I think, or maybe my worry as such, is that I wonder if this battling is purely just because it is the first race with these new regulations, and is it going to be that when we get to a few races' time, and obviously only time will tell, that when everyone is now used to these new regulations, we can just get into the standard where everyone is able to get not the complete maximum out of the car, but certainly there's a lot less chaos going on because these people are used to managing these new regulations essentially.
I think you did see that a little bit towards the end of the race as well, because Verstappen was trying to get past Norris for, I would say, probably about half the race, and he wasn't able to in the end. And I sort of, but the sort of impression I got from the race was that the Red Bull looked like a quicker car than the McLaren, at least in Australia. And so that does make me slightly concerned that if we go, we'll do our preview later, but if we look to China, for example, is it going to be a little bit harder when the sort of battery deployment is sort of more commonly known, and the drivers know where to sort of deploy the batteries, and then it becomes a little bit of a standstill. Whereas the sort of Russell Leclerc fight was clearly part of it because the regs were still quite green. Both Leclerc and Russell were clearly using their batteries in different places to try and get one up over the other. So you sort of wonder whether that stays the same, and only time will tell. But I mean, I was in general pretty pleasantly surprised, and I think there was also quite a lot of battles that we didn't see as well in the midfield, especially in the early laps as well, because you had the Gasly and Ocon fight, and that was also really exciting as well. So I feel like I'm still going to China thinking we could see some really good racing, but I do still have concerns that over the course of the season drivers will become sort of more attuned to where to use the battery, and racing might sort of stagnate a little bit.
I mean, I don't know if it was perhaps also a bit of the reason we were so surprised. I think surprise is a very good word, because obviously after the testing in Bahrain and in Barcelona, we probably had the worst impression possible of these new regulations, because everyone was slating on them. the journalists, the drivers, everyone who pretty much observed the testing and saw how kind of inferior these cars were compared to previous generations because of these things like super clipping. So when we actually did get to see some good racing, we were like, wow, we weren't expecting that. But I think obviously each new track is going to bring a new set of challenges and is going to be a new experience for all of the drivers, all 22 drivers, for learning how to manage these this battery deployment. And so it will be interesting to see drivers get to grips with that. And I do think we could get some very good racing in future, but at the same time, it's as we've already been discussing, whether it's because of just the new regulations and drivers not getting to grips with them yet is uncertain.
I'd also like to hop on the pessimism bus for one stop and just say that it's entirely possible that Formula One teams do what they do best and ruin the racing for everyone by piling on the downforce onto the cars, resulting in lots of dirty air being thrown back to everyone else, just like in 2022, and we get barely any battling. So that's entirely possible as well, but for now, it's great.
I think that's my concern, because we had this very similar type of optimism in 2022 when we saw Verstappen and Leclerc go head-to-head, and that slowly got zapped away from us, unfortunately. So that's my concern. I think I am on the side of, I think the racing in of itself, in terms of the battery deployment, is good for racing, at least from a spectator perspective. For us, it's great. I think from the noises that we've heard from the drivers, on the other hand, I don't think they're particularly fond of it at this point. I think 3 different drivers have described it akin to Mario Kart, for example, which I can understand. It feels like you're using a magic mushroom, or if you know what I mean. So I think that's definitely something to think about. I'm intrigued to see how it develops over the first few races, because I think that's going to tell us a lot. If we have a situation where in China we don't see as many changes for the lead or changes for like the sharp end, I think that's clear that they are learning. But I think if this is something they can maintain and sustain over the course of the first half of the season, let's say, that will give us as spectators quite a bit more hope, I think. In terms of just qualifying as well, because you mentioned, Harvey, that there were things about that you didn't particularly like, particularly about the super clipping. I guess from a spectator perspective, what did you find qualifying was like?
I thought that qualifying was definitely a lot worse than it was in previous years, and I think it's especially bad because they'd often cut away before you got to turns 9 and 10, but obviously they posted the Russell pole lap to their YouTube channel and I watched it, and it's just the way that I don't know if it's I don't think it's downshifting. I think it is just the super clipping, but going into turns 9 and 10, how they're just clearly not going flat out, and you want qualifying to be balls to the wall. You want them to be trying to find absolutely every 100th, every 10th in every corner, and you just feel like that when they're not being able to sort of push the car, because the sort of optimum way is through sort of deploying the battery at the right times. I just sort of despair at the moment that they clearly need to make changes to qualifying, because it's just not. It is still part of the product, part of the package of F1. And I sort of agree that last year we did have a bit of a qualifying championship, and I still would prefer good racing to good qualifying. But I mean, in an ideal world, we'd have, flat out qualifying and also really good racing, like we saw at least in the first half of the race, I think.
It does make sense, I think, that Verstappen of all people was the person who was definitely most vocal about this. Not just because he is probably the most vocal driver when he does have complaints, but also because I think the way the new regulations are, it was probably more akin to a chess game than actual outright racing, because it was so much strategizing involved. And certainly I think, as quite rightly mentioned, that was mostly shown on the qualifying, where you just get this drop off in speed at the end of the straight, and I think the problem that a lot of fans have with it is that it kind of goes against the nature of what Formula One is meant to be, because a lot of drivers are saying there's been a lot of comparison to Formula E, as in like, oh, we're not doing Formula E, we shouldn't be strategizing this much, and especially because Formula One, for me at least, puts itself out not just as obviously a great spectator sport, but also the pinnacle of engineering and kind of the greatest racing series in the world. And so you should be perhaps seeing, or at least this is what fans have been saying, you should be seeing these cars going flat out on something like a qualifying lap. So is this something that we are going to like, even if it gives us good racing? I don't know. Maybe it is kind of going to leave a bit of a sour taste in everyone's mouth if this is the price we've got to pay for perhaps good racing. But then, do we want the old format back? I don't know.
I think personally, I take this as much as I did dislike qualifying.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because Sunday's the main event, right? It's the Grand Prix. It's wheel-to-wheel
True.
racing, which is the most exciting part of a Formula One weekend. So if I were to choose between a better race or better qualifying, I choose better race every time. But my issue with qualifying was that I couldn't seem to appreciate good driving. Like, I don't know when the drivers were braking. It wasn't very clear because they were super clipping at the end of the straight. You know, was one driver braking 10 meters later than everyone else? I just couldn't tell when they were hitting the brakes. You know, when you were back in 2022 or any year since then, that's not this year, you could see immediate deceleration. As soon as they hit the brakes, you knew when they were on the limit. But with this one, it looks like they're backing off into turns 9 and 10. You know, you're not getting the full picture.
I do think there is an element of the broadcast not doing this job correctly. I think, particularly when you're like when we mentioned the changes in the lead to the grid, changes at the front of the grid, we were saying, okay, is this because of battery saving or is this genuinely an overtake that is because of skill? It's very hard to ascertain that. So I think that's something that the broadcast team need to make sure they are transferring better quality information to us. Just think that that's important from a viewer's perspective, because I think that us not knowing it cheapens those overtakes in some ways.
But you mentioned that some overtakes might not be down to skill, but to the battery element. But then, is that maybe now going to be the new idea of skill for a driver? Is being able to manage this battery? Because clearly this is so much more important than previous years. So it's so maybe that is going to be it's definitely going to be a more important element if the regulations stay the way that they are.
Yeah, I mean, there's still skill in racing, which we saw. Charles Leclerc was showcasing his skill again and again because the battery wasn't all powerful. It wasn't a motorway overtake on the straight. It was getting him alongside, and he still had to do the work on the brakes, even though you couldn't really tell when he was braking, to get the move done and complete the overtake. And there was still a lot of wheel-to-wheel skill on show. It just wasn't skill in terms of pushing flat out and being one with your car on the track, pushing at full beans, going as fast as possible. It wasn't one lap skill again and again. It was racing skill.
I might be betraying my biases here, but I do feel like it's sort of
happens regularly on the podcast. Don't worry.
All the benefit for F1 if the closer that Charles Leclerc is to the front, honestly, because how that guy races, it honestly is so exciting. Whether it's with Verstappen or Russell or Norris, I think he's absolutely fantastic. And I thought some of the racing that those two provided really did. Like, I was absolutely on the edge of my seat. It was fantastic. But I'll add to Daniel's point on qualifying. One of the big problems I had is that with the previous regs, if a driver set a purple set to 1, you sort of knew that they could be on a good lap, or like you sort of knew that they were absolutely going and had a good chance to get pole. Whereas now, if you sort of see, I don't know, Hamilton will go purple in set to 1 quite a lot, you don't know if that's just where they've used the battery on the lap. And I just sort of feel like you could see Hamilton, you know, being sort of basically level with Russell until set to 3, where clearly the Mercedes had kept the battery and they was able to sort of use it there while the Ferrari had none. So I feel like in that sense we don't have as much information available to us on which drivers genuinely setting a good lap or which drivers just used too much battery too early to set the best lap that they can.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because I think I saw Hadjar be purple in sector 1. That fills you with excitement and think, okay, Red Bull might be in this. They were not in this. So I think that's another thing where it's just these are obviously things that they need to iron out either on the broadcasting or simply it's something we need to get used to as an audience.
I think as well with as the drivers' experience with these new regulations and their cars improves, I think as well those purple sectors viewing on a qualifying lap will begin to become more representative of their actual pace, because as teams and drivers get more used to these regulations, it'll kind of become similar as to where they're deploying their battery and when in the lap, because that will be, I don't know, maybe objectively the best point on that lap to deploy the battery, and so that kind of standardizes it across all the drivers. So maybe it is just a case of that qualifying was probably one of the first times that all the drivers were actually trying to go full pace, especially on a track that they hadn't had any testing or anything like that at before. So that might be the reason why. So yeah, as with all of our points, I suppose, might just be needing to get used to the new regulations.
No, I think that's a great point to make. Actually, I think it will kind of smooth out, and the teams will understand where they should be deploying on a lap. But also from the broadcast side, I agree they could do more. In that, when you have the graphic at the bottom saying the lap time that they're having and whether they have purple sectors or not, why not put a little bit of how much charge they've got left in the battery, and then you can kind of compare that to what other drivers had at that point, and it could kind of help to compare across them, so you're not so in the dark about their deploy.
I agree that I think F1 has to do a lot better on these new regs at sort of providing the viewer with sort of more information based on battery level. And I still don't exactly know how boost mode works, to be honest. I'm still not sure. But I feel like they could have just done a better job. And I feel like part of that kind of goes back to testing. I mean, obviously the final test was fully broadcast, but apart from that, we only had sort of an hour a day of the previous one, and then Barcelona wasn't sort of broadcast at all. So I feel like they've had opportunities to potentially give sort of more information, give these sort of, I don't know, the sort of actual broadcast, the viewer sort of more information on sort of who's got more battery, whether that's in the race or in qualifying. And I still don't feel that they've quite got that yet. I'd actually be interested to see everyone's opinion on in the race how they got rid of thousandths and hundredths on the timing.
Oh yeah, I saw complaints about this on the WhatsApp group as we were watching, but yeah, I suppose didn't seem like it's updating as much. No, to be honest, I think Sky Sports, even back last year when everyone was so used to the regulations, I still think that they put up some useless graphics. So it's maybe they just need to, maybe in a couple of years' time they'll work out what they want to do and what's best.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about it and I was like, do we really need hundreds and thousands on a race timing column? And then I thought, but how are we going to know if they're within a second of the car ahead if it just says 1.0? You know, that's a rounding error, isn't it? Is it below a second? Is it over a second? We don't know. Do they have the overtake? I don't think the overtake's even that powerful. It was just when they were on the boost that was making the difference. But you know, that's the kind of thing that they need to consider.
Let's delve into the actual results. We've talked quite a bit about what we've seen, and I think we have to reserve judgment quite a bit for that, just to see if our opinions kind of change on that matter over the course of China and beyond that too. Let's go and talk through what we saw, because we had this feeling of Merc coming into this weekend potentially the strongest, but Ferrari should be in and around that area. How much was it a surprise then when we saw George Russell take pole ahead of Kimi Antonelli, with the Mercs being over 0.8 of a second ahead of the nearest constructor?
It was worrying to say the least, I think, because you don't want to get into another. It kind of akin to what we had with the last regulations, where it's like, oh, hopefully this will produce closer racing, and then Verstappen produces one of the most dominant seasons in all of Formula 1 history. But I think after Sunday though, all my worries were gone really, because clearly I don't know what on earth Ferrari doing on the Saturday, or why their car just was not up to pace with the Mercedes, but whether it's just because of their Ferrari's amazing start, because clearly they've thought about this starting procedure and getting off the line a lot more than other teams that put them in the fight. But it does seem like the Mercedes and the Ferrari cars were very close together on purely raw pace off the start, and really it was just surprise Ferrari strategy that let them down in the end. So I think we should get some good. I think we should definitely get some good racing and maybe even a title battle for this season. And it's certainly not going to be as dominant as we've seen in previous seasons, I don't think, unless Mercedes have some rapid development compared to the Ferraris, which also isn't, I suppose, completely unreasonable, maybe.
Daniel is laughing at this suggestion.
No. I think that Mercedes were probably caught a bit by surprise, actually, by the pace that Ferrari had. I think they expected, especially after Saturday, like everyone did, to have a bit more pace in the bag than they actually displayed. I think everyone was caught by surprise by Charles Leclerc jumping from 4th to 1st off the line, which was a sight to behold at 4 a.m. That's for sure. but I was very pleasantly surprised by Ferrari's pace, to be honest. Even after their blunder, was it a blunder maybe, that we'll get into, they still kept pace with the Mercedes. We don't know how much the Mercedes were managing at that point, but Ferrari were able to kind of maintain the gap. They'd already lost the race, but they were able to keep pace, which was a very pleasant surprise after Saturday, I must say.
After qualifying, I really got flashbacks to 2019, where Ferrari looked so good in testing, and then Mercedes dropped, I can't remember, it was like 3/10 from the rest of the field and then dominated the race. But actually the race didn't pan out like that, which is definitely for the benefit of the sport, because I think a really boring race with Mercedes going 1-2, with no disrespect to Mercedes, would have led to a lot of questions about these new regs. But I was pleasantly surprised with how, for at least the first part of the race, so Ferrari was sort of able to keep pace with the Mercedes. I still do wonder if the Mercedes have a little bit more that they weren't showing, especially at the end. I think the next few races will sort of show that, how much sort of advantage Mercedes have compared to Ferrari and the rest of the grid. But I think we've got a sort of inkling there that it's really not decided, and it's not going to be either sort of Russell or Antonelli winning all of the races for the foreseeable future, because I can really see, if Ferrari can work on that engine where they clearly have a sort of gap to Mercedes, how they can definitely fight for wins. I think with both Charles and Lewis. So I think you do have a possibility, not a certainty, but a possibility of an inter-team sort of title fight. And also it was encouraging how Antonelli was closing up to Russell, and he looks like he's going to try and give a fight to the who's the first driver in George Russell. But I was fairly sort of pleasantly surprised, I think, by the race pace of the Ferrari.
I think even if the Mercedes pace over the Ferraris did carry through into the Sunday and they did win by quite a high margin, there would be two reasons I say why I wouldn't be completely terrified for a boring season already. Firstly, because Antonelli seemed, as you mentioned, so good, and the fact that he kind of did drop back after the start and he was still able to finish very close to Russell, I don't know what the exact time was, like 3 seconds or something, I think, was very impressive from him, given his this is only his second season in Formula One, and I think he could really do amazing things with that car and definitely challenge Russell for wins and who knows, maybe even the championship. But also as well, because it's the new regulations, there can be a lot of development going on throughout the season, more compared to other seasons where you're a bit more into the regulations, because there's more room to improve, I think. So I do not doubt at all that McLaren and Red Bull will get closer to that fight, even if it probably will be a bit too late for them. So I would argue that if Mercedes did look very dominant, I would still hope that one of those teams, Ferrari, McLaren or Red Bull, would kind of start to take the fight to them at the end of the season. Again, whether it would be too late or not, I don't know. But I think that it is very promising to see that at least Ferrari and Mercedes, at least in terms of their car, seem to be on very similar levels at the moment. So there's Ferrari aren't really trying to play catch up, for example.
Huge weekend for Antonelli, especially coming back after his FP3 shunt, which would have probably cost him some confidence, but still to come back and put it on the front row of the grid just behind his teammate was mega impressive. Another point, I've thought of another C word to describe this weekend, which is confusing.
Yes.
I was very much confused after Saturday by McLaren. I really thought coming into this year that they would give Mercedes a proper run for their money, because I probably underestimated the huge job that they had on their hands to understand an engine that wasn't fundamentally theirs in an engine set of regulations. But the regulations by the FIA are stipulated such that Mercedes have to share so much information about their power unit with McLaren. I thought there's no way that McLaren are at a significant disadvantage this year. And we've seen it time and time again in Formula One, where the team that can build the best chassis and the best car carry such momentum into new regulation sets. We saw it 2017, Mercedes carried it. 2022, Red Bull carried huge momentum. And I really did expect the same from McLaren this time, which is why it was a bit of a shock when they were so far off come Saturday. But like I said, it's probably an underestimation on my part of the challenge that they had. And I think it speaks to the job that Mercedes have done, but also probably the benefit of being a works team.
Yeah, let's segue into this idea, because McLaren have been complaining about the amount of information that Merck have provided them about that engine. Merck being the works team, they provide the engines for McLaren, Alpine and Williams. Now, they provide the engines, but they don't need to provide every bit of information they have on the engine. And I think that was the source of a lot of frustration from Andrea Stella, who came out in an interview and said they were disappointed with Merck's kind of conduct on that front. And I think this was a very similar sentiment echoed by James Vowles as well. Harvey, I guess my question is, do you think this is something that we're going to be seeing at least only at the beginning of the season, or is this something that's going to be a commonplace thing come season end?
I still see it actually like being an issue potentially at the season's end, because I think that Mercedes have had 2 pretty humiliating years where they've been beaten, fairly comfortably beaten, by their customer team in McLaren. And I just feel like you now have a situation where McLaren didn't get the new spec engine until Australia, whereas Mercedes were able to test it, were able to run it in the Bahrain test. And I just feel that this is not a sort of fight or a sort of dispute that's going to be settled for a long time, because I think it's obviously in Mercedes' interest to peg back their potential rivals in McLaren and potentially Williams as well, in order to just have, because they'll obviously have a much better understanding of how to work the engine, how to work the battery in with the aerodynamic design, which you didn't necessarily have in the last regulations when you had an engine freeze. And I just feel like it does definitely handicap McLaren, and I think they are definitely right to be annoyed and right to be confused at how they've gone from having this massive advantage over the Mercedes to now being 53 seconds off the lead Mercedes. I'm not surprised that they're angry at that. I'm not surprised that they're sort of raising problems with that. And I feel like this could be a developing story throughout the entire year if McLaren can't significantly bridge that gap across the course of the season.
I think the trouble is as well is that even if McLaren do get something out of this and Mercedes do admit that they were wrong and maybe do need to pass over more information, still the damage has already been done, because Mercedes have had all that time to develop and integrate their engine with their chassis, and that will undoubtedly have a lot of effects, especially given the gap that we saw in Australia for the remainder of the season. And so if there is actually grounds, I don't know actually where they are. I don't know if it's just allegations or if there's actually any sort of investigation going on. But the damage has already been done. Really, is what I would say.
I'd agree. I think, despite McLaren's rapid rate of development, I think to understand such a complex thing as these 26 engines, and then invent a solution, develop it, bring it to the track, is going to take a long time. Probably later than a third of the way into the season, which is where they started turning it around in 2024, for example. And even then, Norris wasn't able to get that championship. Yes, he was racing for Verstappen for that one, but I think Russell is proving that he's a very high caliber driver, and when he's got the car, he's going to put in the results such that it makes him a very difficult driver to catch when the situation switches. So, yeah, maybe McLaren will get something from this. I very much doubt it. I think it's very much just going to be the situation going forward, but I definitely have liked to see McLaren at the front with their driver lineup.
Now, let's move from McLaren to the other team who we kind of kept as in that big four. And I still don't really know where to place them, and that's Red Bull. We saw Hadjar finish third in qualifying and gave us a lot of hope, but then his engine conked out around lap 18-19, if I'm not mistaken. And Verstappen started from the back after a spin in qualifying, was able to recover really well, finished just behind Lando Norris in sixth. Where do we think the Red Bull lies? You've mentioned earlier, Harvey, that you think they're probably a little bit quicker than the McLarens. Do you think they are anywhere near the Ferraris or the Mercs?
I think it's really hard to say, and I think if you're looking at those top four teams, Red Bull are clearly the most difficult to place. In my kind of personal estimations, I feel like they're a little bit off the sort of Mercedes and the Ferraris, but then you can never count out Max Verstappen, and I wouldn't. If he was on the podium next race, I wouldn't be surprised, even in inferior machinery. but I do just feel like what I was most encouraged by with Red Bull is how actually good and comfortable Hadjar looked. He looked far more comfortable than we've seen from a Red Bull second driver in a long time, potentially since Ricciardo. And I feel like that's a good sign that they built a car that's a lot probably more stable and sort of easier to drive, rather than sort of trying to chase the sort of best car for Verstappen to be able to run at the cost of the second driver. And I do feel like they've definitely surprised me by how good that Red Bull Ford engine has been compared to sort of the other works teams. So I feel like they've got a decent platform. Whether they can build on that and whether Verstappen can fight for wins and even the title is still slightly in doubt at the moment, but I could see that changing over the course of the season.
I think we should remember as well that for both teams, Red Bull and McLaren, we didn't really get to see anyone's full race pace over the course of the entire Grand Prix, really, apart from probably Lando Norris. Obviously, Piastri crashed out in the formation lap, which meant that we were deprived of seeing him running at all in race conditions, and he also did qualify ahead of Norris, so he potentially could have got more out of that car if he was running. And then obviously Verstappen, through no fault of his own, started at the back. Good recovery drive from him, obviously, but then could he have done more from starting in around his teammate Isaac Hadjar? Probably. He's Max Verstappen, and Hadjar was doing incredibly well in the race and was maybe even challenging for a podium before his car blew up, pretty much. So not his car, his engine, but so I don't think we've really seen either Red Bull or McLaren's pace, true pace, over the course of an entire race at the moment. I would put Red Bull ahead of McLaren. I think Red Bull might sit in a zone a bit like what they were in 2018, where it's Mercedes and Ferrari that were kind of firmly at the front, and then Red Bull could take advantage and challenge for a win very occasionally given the circumstances, but more likely than not they're challenging for that final spot on the podium, for example. And the reason I would say that is purely because over McLaren, at least, is because I just ultimately have more faith in Verstappen to be able to get the most out of the car. And as Harvey quite rightly mentioned, just how comfortable Hadjar looked in that Red Bull, really throughout qualifying and the race, until obviously again he was taking out the race through no fault of his own.
Yep, absolutely. I think the fact that Max was able to close up right to the back of Lando probably points to the fact that they have a faster car than the McLaren, right? It's as simple as that. There weren't really any other factors that helped them along the way. It was mostly pure pace, and also the fact that Max was carving through the field beautifully, might I add. Some of the overtakes around the outside of turn 9 were splendid, as we've come to expect from him. Hadjar, he said after the race that he couldn't count the number of issues that he had on the car. Noise, all of his senses were going at once. He had, the steering wheel. He was hearing the engine noise was awful. He could smell something in the car, but he could count on on one hand, the number of cars ahead of him in the race, which I think is a really positive sign for him. He's had a setback in Australia before. He'll be back stronger than ever. I believe. But he should also make hay while the sun shines, because look at Perez, start of 2022. He had a great start to the season. He had his first ever pole position in the second race of that season. And then the car started to develop slowly towards Max, and it kind of got a bit out of control for Perez, and he had a bit of a spiral, especially into the second year of those regulations. I'm not saying it'll happen again this time. In fact, I kind of doubt that it will, because the infrastructure and the framework at Red Bull is not the same as it was 4 years ago, but it's something that I think we should also consider. I think we should give it more time before saying Hadjar's fully up to speed.
Yeah, I think we'll wait and see, but I'm completely in agreement. I think they are the third fastest team at this point. I think we'll see what Verstappen can do in China and see how close they are to the Ferraris and Mercs, because I think there is definitely a discussion to have there. Let's move further down the grid. There were a series of midfield teams who were able to pick up points this weekend, with Ollie Behrman finishing in 7th. We had the Audi of Bortoleto in 9th, we had Arvid Lindblad in 8th, and Pierre Gasly not picking up a point in 10th. So we had quite a lot of different constructors to make up the rest of that top 10. Do you think that's a sign of things to come from the midfield?
I feel like the midfield, we still don't have... I sort of have an idea of where each car sort of laid, but I don't know the exact order. I think Audi looked particularly good in Audi and Haas, and actually Racing Bulls as well. Those three teams I thought are kind of at the top of the midfield, but I don't know which order yet. I think in my opinion, Behrman looked fantastic. Obviously, Lindblad had an incredible race for a rookie. We can get onto that, but I do feel like Audi have definitely surprised me. I thought they'd be on the lower end of the midfield, but they almost got two cars in Q3, which was fantastic. Would have been a fantastic result, and I feel like they've got two good drivers in Bortoletto and Hülkenberg. I feel like the team that's really disappointed me, actually, apart from Aston Martin, but is Williams. I feel like Williams have promised a lot, and especially considering they didn't do Barcelona, they had a really poor Australian GP weekend, to be honest, both through qualifying and the race, and I feel like they've got a lot of work to do if they're going to propel themselves back up to the top of that sort of midfield area, especially considering people were saying they could fight for wins. I mean, I feel like they've really disappointed so far, and they've got a lot of work to do.
I think it's kind of disappointing, particularly when you consider that they have been sacrificing seasons after seasons for this new reg set, right? This has been the thing that James Vowles has really talked up. So about breaking things so that in 2026 they are ready to be competitive once again and bring Williams back to the front. And that's just not happened. They missed Barcelona, like you mentioned, Harvey. They've also come to this race really overweight. I think the figure is 27 kilos or something ridiculous, which is quite a heavy amount to be chunky by, I guess. Do we expect them to develop quick enough for it to be recoverable? Because that's a massive amount of weight to try and get rid of.
I think the problem for me is that, yes, they'll obviously be able to develop, but then so will other teams, and they are starting significantly on the back foot already. And I just don't see, as we mentioned, given the pace that was shown by particularly Audi and Haas, a team who I think received very little attention actually from a media standpoint compared to some other midfield teams like Williams, for example, and they almost came out of nowhere, and I guess no one really expected them. I certainly didn't expect them to be one of the best midfield teams, but then here we are. And also I think for Audi as well, the fact that I think if you were to ask most people, who do you expect out of Audi's lineup to get the good result when it's available, you would say Hülkenberg. And so the fact that it was Bortoletto, who I'm not saying he's a bad driver, but certainly I think Hülkenberg would be able to, I think, still bring the most out of that car if he was running. The fact that it was Bortoletto who was able to get a ninth, a very good result. You've got to ask where could Hülkenberg have finished if he was running as well. So I think for me it's definitely those two teams, and maybe Racing Bulls as well, with how good Lindblad was racing as well. Racing with Verstappen at one point, which is like, oh my goodness, how he's been able to do that in his first race is very impressive. But I just do not see. Same really with Aston Martin as well. I'm sure we'll come to talk with them in a moment. But I think just, yes, they will be able to improve, but just how much they're starting on the back foot, I just don't see that. Maybe this season is even salvageable for them, which is okay. Maybe an overstatement given how early we are onto the season, but then I trust a lot of teams to develop very quickly with these new regulations.
It's definitely safe to say that there are a clear bottom three teams. Slowest, you'd have to say, well, just worst, Aston Martin. We don't even really know their pace because they couldn't
Well,
run
to
properly.
be fair, they weren't at the back of the grid in qualifying.
No,
Well, not right at the back.
not right at the back, I guess.
We need to talk as well how Alonso just came back from the dead and just started
he
doing more
was
laps.
resurrected, that's right. Lance Stroll finished the race but 15 laps down. He was also resurrected. So that's their situation. Definitely worst team.
Yeah.
But then next up you have Cadillac, obviously. Not much can be expected of them in the very first race. They were about 3 seconds off in qualifying, I think, which is probably what's expected at the start of new regulations and as a new team. But Williams, I think, comfortably fit into the third slowest team spot, unfortunately. Sainz didn't even qualify, so his race was kind of a write-off anyway. He had an ERS issue in FP3, I think, which meant he couldn't qualify. But Albon finished in 12th position, only in front of Lawson and Colapinto, who kind of had mares of their own in a way. So yeah, it's a shame. I think with the weight thing, I hadn't heard 27 kilos. That's a lot of weight. Normally, when a team's overweight, they can kind of tune it down over the course of a season, and it's a problem in the first few rounds, but then they kind of tune it out. And I think there's a lot of performance that they can unlock there. Having said that, almost 30 kilograms must be almost unheard of in Formula 1, because that's a lot of weight to shift. You mentioned Audi. I think that's a really solid first running. And yeah, I didn't quite expect Bortoletto to get up to speed so quickly with that car and that power unit. But I think, that Swiss group have done a great job to make such a reliable power unit, except for the fact that Hülkenberg didn't start the race. So I retract that statement. That one specifically. But
there's a 50% chance of them to do well.
Yeah, exactly. It's a point scoring power unit now.
It's like Williams last year, wasn't it? Where just like Albon or Sainz was always doing well, and then the other one was just
Yeah.
I mean, Sainz was unlucky in Australia as well, because he had front wing. It wasn't a damage, it was a reliability thing. But it felt like last year, every single race, Sainz was getting into a scrap with another driver and losing his front wing. And now this time, it's just a reliability thing that's costing his front wing. So yeah, he's just incredible.
I think I saw somewhere actually, and I was just checking this, but it might have been the most high quality Q1 eliminations of all time. We saw Verstappen out, Alonso out, Perez and Bottas both out, who obviously are race winners before, and Sainz as well. And then
why are you forgetting the GOAT Lance Stroll?
And Lance Stroll. I mean, how can I forget? But I mean, you look at that and you just think, wow. I mean, that is quite the way to tell the grid. I mean, especially if you look back, say, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, and the drivers that would be, tailing the grid then. I mean, it's quite incredible. But I do feel like there's if we're going to look at, I mean, Cadillac and Aston Martin. Cadillac, it was fine. I mean, the fact they got a driver to finish that race was I think a pretty successful in itself. You can't expect them to be sort of making headway into the midfield yet as a new team. But I feel like they just were able to get good mileage, know that they can at least finish the race with one. I mean, Bottas had a lot of issues, but Perez largely was just running his own race, and that was good for the team. And then Aston Martin, I mean, well...
to be honest, it's better than they probably thought when they were considering the fact that Alonso and Stroll were saying 15, 25 laps as the maximum. The fact that they went out and came back, went back into the pits, came back out, is probably as small of a pro that you can really get, to be honest. It's really taking them really small wins there. How long before Aston Martin do a full race distance?
Oh my goodness.
That's the question. The fact that we have to ask that question is crazy.
3 years. No, it's not 3 years. I expect them to... Here's my thought. Adrian Newey, I trust him to develop. Honda, on the other hand, do I trust them to develop? I'm not too sure. I think that definitely by... after a few races, maybe like round 4 or 5 or 6, maybe they'll be able to actually complete a race distance. But that's not the only thing that comes into a Formula 1 race. So I think that they, as a best, they're going to finish above Williams and maybe get to 9th this season. I just think the situation is so dire for them that no team can develop that fast to be able to salvage anything really from this season.
Let's talk about the start, because there was something that we probably need to talk about, and that was Lawson's really slow start and how Colapinto had to have evasive measures, one might say, to survive.
The fact they didn't show this on the broadcast as well was insane.
Terrible, absolutely terrible. It reminded me actually of that. It must have been a few years ago with the F2 incident where Hadjar had incredible reflexes to not hit. I can't remember who it was in the Monaco tunnel, and I just think, I mean, it's when I see clips like that actually that I really think these guys are incredible. Like, what they do is incredible. You do think it at times, but especially when you see that sort of instinctive reflexes for Colapinto to avoid Lawson, that I can't really excuse. Colapinto didn't have that great of a race afterwards, but the fact that he's just managed to avoid him there and just stay in the race, I think is pretty impressive in itself. And I feel like it definitely shows that there's still a lot of questions with the starts and how some teams just clearly don't get it compared to others. But that was quite an incredible thing to witness, to be honest. But I'm not...
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Monaco pit lane, was it Ritomo Miyata, I think, who Hajjar was trying to avoid? I can't remember, but yeah, that definitely reminded me of that. You're kind of made aware that we're mere mortals in comparison to these superhumans who have been training their whole life for this purpose, and it was incredibly impressive. I want to say about the starts, I think earlier in the season, or probably more pre-season, it was expected that they'd be worse than they actually were. I think only one car having an issue that wasn't his fault off the line was probably better than a lot of teams' media expected. But the fact that the issue was there in the first place is something that will have to be ironed out. I think it will be. I think solutions will be found. Liam Lawson has said since, it wasn't my fault, but we know what the problem was and we can find ways to avoid it from now on. So I don't think we'll be seeing that again from their car, but it's a case of will other teams have the same problem? Like, for example, Verstappen's issue in qualifying. We've seen that before. Perez had it in Cadillac in free practice, for example. The rear's just locked and the car spun. It's like, what's going on? That wasn't me. But they've found a fix for it. And I doubt it will happen again for them. So it is just learning phases. I think it will happen less and less as the season goes on. But it was quite scary in the moment. And I relate very much to George Russell's reaction in the cool-down room when he saw that Nimes.
Yeah, okay, you're gonna say.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think something we didn't cover in terms of the what added to the excitement of the race, not really from the point of view of these regulations being so different, but just whenever there is a regulation change, is just the amount of unpredictability and chaos is just from the reliability as such, and every team trying to get to grips with the new regulations, which is what made it so exciting. And so I think if we can have a bit more of this element of unpredictability, obviously with safety included as well, then that should make for definitely a few exciting races.
Cool, let's go through the prediction and wind this show down, shall we? So, we can only have two people here who are kind of accountable for their prediction this weekend, because Lucy's not with us, and neither is Ethan. But we can still go through their predictions regardless. I'll start with you, Daniel, because the host never does the prediction first, as per usual.
Sure.
I'm going to enjoy this.
Yeah, or well, you're...
I'm not. I'm definitely not. Okay, we'll do pole top and top 5 first.
Yes.
Pole position, Kimi Antonelli. Not far off. I thought I was going to be a lot far off after FP3, but not the case. So good recovery from him, but sadly nothing for me. I advocate that we include the 1 point when we're one position off for qualifying pole position as well.
Come on, let's not.
Fine. Whatever.
You missed on that.
I'll implement that when I'm in charge, it's fine. P1 I predicted Max Verstappen, which I had hope for
maybe if he didn't have the issue in Q1, you never know.
I can't have seen Verstappen.
No, I knew he wasn't going to, especially when George Russell dunked 8 tenths on the rest of the field. P2, Oscar Piastri.
God.
Oh, God.
We didn't even really talk about Oscar Piastri, but my goodness, was that gut-wrenching. Oscar Piastri is not the kind of guy to go away and cry behind the bush like Mika Häkkinen in Italy '99, I want to say. But that would have hurt him a lot. He said that he was able to move on pretty quickly, which I admire him for, because that would have stung possibly even more than last year, although there wasn't a victory on the line this year, so maybe not. P3, Charles Leclerc. 3-pointer, bang on the money. There we go. How did I know? I'm the oracle. P4, I put Kimi Antonelli, so I underestimated him. Clearly underestimated George Russell, because he's nowhere in my top 5 either. And in 5th position, Hajjar.
That's actually what I was going to say. That's a bold move, not putting Russell in your top 5.
I just forgot. I genuinely forgot about him and Norris. I was switching them around at the last moment, and I regret everything. But that's my poll in top 5.
Awesome. Let me go through mine, and then I'll go through Ethan's and Lucy's respectively. I nailed it personally. But at least at least the start at least. So I put pole for George Russell.
Yeah,
that did happen. I put win for George Russell. That did also happen. But
I remember now. I didn't want to be boring.
yeah,
That's the issue.
I just wanted points on the board, my friend. I've got Antonelli second.
I've genuinely never seen Anwar just like
So,
this
smug.
smug.
Maybe I just did it like that. I then put Lewis Hamilton third. He finished fourth, so a point there. I put Norris in fourth. I put Norris in fourth. He finished in fifth. That's another point. And then Verstappen in fifth. He did finish sixth, so that's an extra point. So my pole and top five netted me a total of 12 points, which is
Wow.
Oh my
I can't
goodness.
complain about. Let me go through Ethan's. He was actually very similar to mine because he said George Russell pole and George Russell win, so he gets 3 points and 3 points there as well, so that's 6 so far. He also matched me and said Mercedes 1-2. Put Antonelli second, nets him another 3. He got third place right as well, so he got Leclerc in third, so he's currently on 12 points from 12. It just fall off after this though, because he sits with Piastri in fourth, who nets him 9 points, but it puts Hamilton in fifth, which nets him 1. So for his pole and top 5, he got 13, so very high scoring so far. And then Lucy's, just to finish off with the pole and top 5, she also went with you in terms of trying to be different, and I think she should regret it because she got Leclerc pole, which did not happen.
Can't believe it though. Can't believe in it.
Yeah. I mean, respect the belief, but just didn't materialise, did it? George Russell in first, which nets her 3. Leclerc in second, which nets her 1. She then put Piastri in third, that did not happen. Antonelli in fourth, no points there. And Hamilton in fifth, which nets her 1 point. So all in, she got 5 points, if I'm not mistaken. From her pole in top 5. Awesome. Let's go through your DNF and random prediction, Daniel. Do you remember who they were?
For sure, I do. DNF was the lowest hanging fruit of all the low hanging fruits, which was Fernando Alonso. So thank you very much.
You got to
I
I saw him get back in the car.
I was very scared when he got
If
resurrected.
you put Lance Stroll, you wouldn't have got this.
No, surely, come on, he wasn't classified. He wasn't a classified finisher. So.
I'm so
No, it's
confused.
like-
If they don't start, is that a DNF?
No,
Is that just...
that's the DNS. We don't count
No,
that.
come on. I thought
No, we've never counted DNS. I don't think.
Have we even had that situation?
No, I don't think we have. But I wouldn't
It
have
is
counted-
written down
It
as
could
DNF.
have happened with Aston Martin because there was rumours that they just weren't going to start the race because they just couldn't.
Yeah.
I think
And
they
then-
need to. Don't they need to start the race to like be approved by the FA or get some
the
race money or
Concord
something?
agreement
Yeah,
on
something
boring
like
stuff. But yeah, I think we recorded that on media day, so like they were already there and present. So they were going to put a car on track. And my random prediction was that active aero will malfunction on a car running in the top 7 in the race. No, but it did malfunction for Carlos Sainz. Like I said, he had that front wing error.
If you said bottom 7, you would have got it.
Bottom 7. I should have said bottom 7. That's a good point. Yeah, I didn't think of that, but no points for that one.
Let me go through my DNF and random prediction. I got lost. I didn't pick the low hanging fruit of the Astons. I put Leclerc, and that did not happen. I said house double points. Ocon was in 11th, so unfortunately I missed out on that by a position, but not too far away there. Ethan said a DNF for Carlos Sainz, and then a random prediction of 4 DNFs or more. That did happen. We had quite a few DNFs, so that's 3 points there, making his total 16, which is pretty good. Very good, actually. And then Lucy's DNF, she also went low-hanging fruit with Alonso, and then 2 full safety cars. We only had 1.
We didn't have any full safety.
Didn't have
Oh,
any full
sorry,
safety cars.
of
All
course,
VSC.
Yeah.
both of them,
Oh
Of
yeah,
course.
of course.
So she finishes on a total of 10 points. But that brings us to the end of this episode, bringing you guys the review of the Australian Grand Prix. I want to thank my guests for coming on, Callum, Daniel and Harvey. And we'll see you in the next one where we look forward to the events of the Chinese Grand Prix, which is happening this weekend as well. So we'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.